started.
Hmm.
And here we are. Welcome everybody to another episode of Mondays with Moshe. It is now January 13th, 2025. And I know that it's getting uh, further on in the year because my eyes are having a harder time seeing the computer screen and reading the date. So that means I'm getting older too. And tonight we are joined with Dr. Ken Adams of Michigan. Dr.
Hmm.
Ken Adams is a clinical psychologist or licensed psychologist out in Michigan with many, many, many years of experience. He'll probably tell us how many and when this all began. And tonight's discussion is the process of treating enmeshment or the process of enmeshment and therapy. What is enmeshment? And very interesting titles. I know you've written a number of books, and two of them specifically are on enmeshment. One is called Silently Seduced, and one is called When He's Married to Mom. So I think you can't sort of get more explicit of what your intention of enmeshment is and what it actually is. I mean, intention can be almost a form of incest enmeshment in some cases, or a form of seduction. That we're going to use the word mom. You're going to correct me if mom is just a euphemism, but let's assume we're going to go with the stereotype and the classic mom becoming very enmeshed with the child, or vice versa. And we're gonna try to understand what this all means. How does enmeshment look? Where does it start? How does it start? And what are some of the risk factors in therapy for enmeshment? So, Ken, thank you very much for honoring us and joining us on this program, as so many other great men and women have. And just do us a favor before, so, in case there's someone out there who doesn't know who you are, tell us a little bit about how you got into this field, into this world of enmeshment, of some of the other areas that you've focused on also, Dr.
Sure.
Carn's
Sure.
world. Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
please.
You made a lot of promises there. I hope I can deliver. So we'll see how we do here. Yeah. So it's funny. I just made a presentation this morning to the Jewish Fresh Start program on enmeshment. So I'm kind of like warmed up for you guys. And I meet a lot of interesting questions in the Orthodox community. The line between honor your parents and separating from your parents and so on and so forth. Well, I began this journey many years ago, and my first professional position was a practicum student at Children's Hospital in Detroit. And I had been trained in a graduate program that was pretty learning theory, right? Cognitive behavioral. I could train my dog, and that was great. But I didn't get a lot of other exposure. Although later the cognitive behavioral learning theory stuff came in handy. But we were treating school phobic kids and kids with psychosomatic disorders. And what became obvious was the relational context and the system of the family was the precursor to the symptoms. And we were particularly working, and so I was learning about family system theories then, which I hadn't really learned in graduate school. So we were doing structural family therapy, some of you who are familiar with that, kind of rearranging the room where the parents were sitting together rather than aligned with the kid. And what we would see is, the kids' school phobia symptoms would go down. They'd have less avoidance around school. When we got the parents together, and my supervisor said to me, well, what do you think's going on? I said, well, he's not as worried about his mother's well-being because his father's at his mother's side. And it was stunning to me to see how you could shift a family system dynamic and impact a symptom in a child, the child being the symptom bearer. So that was sort of my first exposure to family therapy. And then I spent the next 5 years working in a residential program for children and adolescents. We were using the DSM-3 at that time, so you can see how far dated it goes for me. And we saw everything in DSM-3 that was underneath the umbrella for the kids. So we did a lot of family therapy, so I learned a lot about enmeshment at that time as well. And then I moved over to working with adults because I decided I was too impatient with parents and I wasn't going to make a very good career out of treating children, nor much money if I stayed with kids. So I started working with adults, adult children of alcoholics, and a man came into me and he was picking up prostitutes compulsively. And he was about 35 years of age, not married, or had one marriage divorce. He was living with his mother in the city of Detroit. He had a place outside the city, but he had to work in the city. So he lived with her about 5, 6 days a week. And at that time, I was really green as a therapist. He said, well, what should I do? I said, well, I instinctively said, move out from your mother's. And so to my surprise, he did that. And immediately his compulsivity to act out sexually, boom, went down.
Hmm.
I was stunned by that. Because everything I had read about enmeshment, nobody talked about the relationship between enmeshed systems of parent and child and the impact or the interruption of sexual unfolding. So that really piqued my curiosity. So I didn't see any of that in the literature. Psychosomatic symptoms, school phobia, but nothing about sexuality. What I had learned was that if you were violated sexually, physically, physical, sexual incest or otherwise, of course, your sexual unfolding would be disrupted and you'd have a lot of trouble, as we know that sexual abuse survivors do, or physical abuse survivors. But I was keenly curious that a non-physical relational context could directly impact sexuality. And that by shifting that dynamic, you could impact the symptom of sexual compulsivity. Now, this guy needed more work. He had we needed addiction approaches, which I had to learn about. But I wrote my first professional article at that time on that case, and wrote my first book based on that case. I was supposed to be writing my dissertation in the graduate library at Wayne State University in Detroit, but instead I was writing this book because it compelled me. So since 1991, Silently Seduced has been selling. That's a long haul for a self-help book. Most self-help books die in about the first 6 months to a year. And I think because it has such a message for people about the fact that, in that particular book, I really looked at the relationship between over-involvement from a parent with the child, where the child becomes the surrogate love object, the surrogate husband or wife, and we all love our kids, right? Those of you who are parents, kids fall in love with their parents, parents fall in love with their kids. My son wanted to marry my wife when he was 6 years of age. He wasn't reading Freud, right? It's just hardwired, right? Your first love affair is with your parents. I hate to break the news to everybody here, but Freud was right. And I watched it as a parent, right? And those of you who have precocious kids know that they want to get married to you and have babies and so on and so forth. They're not learning that on the Disney Channel. It's hardwired. It's hardwired. It's the early bud of romance. And so I just was fascinated by that connection. And so I never looked back. I started writing more on that subject. I started getting trained on that. So when we're looking so Silently Seduced looked at this burden that I have to fill. So we're going to focus on mothers and sons because it's the easiest for me to do. But make no mistake, daughters and their mothers and daughters and their fathers also qualify. To some degree, sometimes sons and their fathers, that's more of a narcissistic extension rather than an enmeshed system, although sometimes we'll see that, particularly if they're sharing a business, for example. You'll see some of that over-involvement. So, in fact, I've been doing I've also designed a workshop that it's been going on for 11 years now, and it's a very specific workshop. We cut the tether between the adult child and the parent. It's from Thursday till Sunday. We haven't got, obviously, an Orthodox community in there because of the Sabbath. I'm working with the Jewish Fresh Start program to try to get them to do it. Excuse me, but what I discovered was that we began working with women too. And I have a colleague who runs the women's workshop. And so we did some qualitative research last year because we were making a presentation. So I was the one interviewing the women. I was shocked because I must have had a bias, but the women sounded just like the men. Terrified of commitment. He wants too much from me. I have a lover outside the state. I don't want him, I can't really make love to him because he wants too much from me. So I had the same symptom profile with the women that I saw with the men. Commitment issues, overdependence on the parent, absorbing the parents' feelings, worries, concerns, merging with their identities, a lack of emancipation and independence is the key issue with enmeshment. What gets disrupted is that my sense of self is arrested and held back because I can't leave your side, mommy or daddy.
Okay, so let's take a pause for a minute because I want to ask you about that. And I do want to invite everyone here who is a mental health professional, which I hope you all are, to raise your hand if you have any questions. You use the React tab on the bottom of your screen. Raise your hand, and we'll call on you at due time. And that's really the best way to ask questions, better than using the chat box, is to ask it live.
Hmm, I
And
agree.
I do want to remind everybody also that we are sponsored by OKclarity.com and by OfficeStreamline.com. Go take a look at those websites. They help us keep keep going so that we can have this show week to week. So thank you to them, and take a look at their websites for really good services. Ken, I want to ask you, we're talking about enmeshment. Kind of, I feel like there's many presuppositions or assumptions in how much people understand or know the term and what is behind enmeshment.
Mhm.
Can we slow down for a moment? Tell us a little bit about what enmeshment is, how it manifests, how it looks, what it looks like,
Mhm.
and where does it come from? Is it enmeshment something that's coming from a child's overdependence on the mother, or is it coming from the mother's, perhaps from the mother's overdependence and narcissistic needs of herself that she uses the child for? I'm sure many of us are familiar with the book, The Drama of the Gifted Child, where Alice Miller talks a lot about narcissistic mothers and how they sort of induce this sense in the child that the child is responsible for mom's feelings. I mean, tell us a little bit about the backstory of enmeshment.
Well, so in general, so enmeshment has become a little more of a popular term, but it basically implies overdependence, lack of privacy, over-involvement, intrusion, lack of autonomy, made to feel guilty and obligated. Love is transactional in enmeshed systems. I raised you, you owe me. Love is not freely given in enmeshed systems.
So how will I know if I am enmeshed with my mom? Let's start, or if my friend, spouse, or client is enmeshed with her mom.
Well, you'll get a complaint by your spouse. That'll be the first thing. Excuse me, my light just fell. Your spouse will have lots of complaints about your mother, and I don't know what happened here, and or your father, and they'll feel. Sorry, one second here.
We
They'll,
see you fine.
they'll
Nothing
feel
changed.
they'll feel thrown under the bus. You'll have trouble with your loyalties. You'll give loyalties to your parent, your family of origin, your work, your addictions, a little bit for your spouse, some for your kids, nothing for yourself. So this sort of placating of loyalties and the inability to commit and disappoint your parents is a key. In emancipation, somebody's got to get disappointed. It better not be you or your spouse. The parent's job is to absorb the disappointment. Their last spiritual assignment, in my opinion, is to take the loss. It is not the adult child's job to cushion the blow. So what you see in enmeshment is over-involvement and caretaking and merging of the parent's feelings at a cost to the identity and the separateness. That is the key, in which I feel guilty and loyal. I feel guilty and loyal to a stranger. So enmeshed individuals have a tremendous amount of guilt. We all talk about affect regulation, right? If you're dealing with trauma survivors, you know what that means. Well, what do you think the affect? Anybody want to take a guess? And I'll come over to your question in a minute. What is the core affect regulating issue for enmeshed people? This is a quiz. What do you think they have to breathe and regulate themselves through? Go ahead, Gregory. Which
I would imagine anxiety about be, be, uh, betraying their relationship with if it's a mother and son, anxiety about betraying the father.
Yeah. So we'll shorthand that to guilt.
There
So,
you go.
so guilt is the primary hangover from enmeshment. Excessive guilt, not shame, shame too, but excessive guilt. I feel responsible for things that I have no business feeling responsible for. I can't find myself in the mix of that whirlwind of affect dysregulation. So all of your gurus on trauma are not talking about enmeshment. Enmeshment is a developmental disorder. It's a trauma developmental disorder. If you've been enmeshed with a parent and you haven't broken free and you've transferred that to a partner and work or an addiction and you're in your 40s, it's downloaded in your identity. You're going to feel guilty for not tipping somebody who gives you a muffin at Starbucks.
So how are we going to distinguish when people are allowed to have strong ties or relationships with their mother? Again, we say mother, everybody understands that to be euphemistic and literal, right? Um, how do we distinguish a healthy relationship or a close relationship? Obviously there's times that the enmeshment is just obvious and blatant, but where's the line drawn between what's a healthy
Okay,
connection or strong?
I'm going to tell you that in a minute. I want to answer that question. The hand raised. Can I do that?
So
She's been
Shoshana,
waiting patiently. How do you say
override
your name, Shoshana?
Shoshana.
Oh, I got that right.
I'm
Okay,
sorry.
give us, yeah, and hang on to your question because it's a good one, Moshe. Shoshana, what's your question? You're on mute.
Okay. I'm not sure if this is a silly question or not, but I'm wondering is there any distinction or commonality between an enmeshed child and a parentified child?
They're a little different. They're a little different. They're same dynamic, over involvement, but a parentified child is usually raised in a home in which they're caretaking and playing the role of the parental role, right? Which has an enmeshed, over-involved dynamic. Whereas when we typically talk, the people we typically get in, they feel more like the mother's boyfriend or husband rather than their parent, although they also can be in a caretaking role. But they usually have a mixture of this sort of, I'm your loyal lover, mommy, I'll never leave you because daddy is a bad man and he's left you lonely. That is more core to the group we see. Sometimes we see parentification doesn't necessarily have that.
But can it not start off as a parentified child and then it develops into an enmeshment?
Sure, it could, yeah. I want to come to Moshe's question too. Thank you for that question, Shoshana. So we could sit here the rest of the time till 10 o'clock and I could ask you for your opinion on what a line is and we'd be debating what a line is. So let me share this with you. You can't know where the line is until you get on the other side and you become willing to disappoint your parent. And you breathe through the guilt and you let them tolerate the disappointment. And that your loyalty, so you're asked what's the healthy line? The healthy line is my loyalty is to myself and my family of procreation, my career, my partner, my kids. First, family of origin second. I confer with my partner over major decisions. I don't announce to her, look, you gotta go along to the family vacation. We're doing this every year. She doesn't get a vote, right? It's not the way it works in healthy systems. In healthy systems, the coupleship is its own sacred space protected by both adults. The parent doesn't get in. So there's your line.
So essentially, my capacity to step away from my mother's needs or wants when there's something that's important would be a reflection of whether or not I am enmeshed with her.
It would be.
If I can step away from it and I don't have to placate,
And you don't feel guilty.
and I don't feel guilty, I
And
don't have to.
you can let her have her own higher
Let her
power.
struggle with her own stuff.
And you're not the God, and she's not your God. Because that's the other, even in systems, and we see this in the Orthodox group, even in other cultural systems or religious systems in which family loyalty or cultural loyalty is revered and if not demanded at some implicit or explicit level. But even in those systems, those families who have healthy boundaries provide emotional, safe spaces for their adult children to come and go. They're not made to feel bad if they can't make the Seder.
Yeah, well, I want to
They're
actually ask you.
meshed, and so in enmeshed systems, guilt and demands for loyalty are delivered frequently. So the line is here. I'm on this side of it. So first I have to get over it before I can decide whether I want to extend myself. Because otherwise I'm always compromising. Can I give you a brief story? I like to always back up my stories with back up my observations. So I worked with the guy who came to our workshop, and he was his mother's golden boy. And you asked this issue about do the boys or the children hang on to the parent? And I don't want to ignore that because that's important here. So he was 55, never married. Not that being married is a sign of health, but it is significant if the choice isn't there. He never felt free to marry. Never lived with a woman. Never had a really long-term relationship. He had a girlfriend about 2 years, kind of kept her at arm's length. Mother was in a memory care facility. He visited her daily. She didn't know who he was. Sometimes she would mistake him for her husband. And yet he showed up every day. 55 years old, made a lot of dough. Well, very successful because he was his mother's golden boy and the family hero and the whole 9 yards. And so he came into the second level. We have 2 levels of workshops for enmeshment. He said, well, I've made progress. I said, oh, he goes, yeah, I'm only visiting my mother every other day. So we chuckled. I said, that's not quite the idea. I said, he goes, what should I do? I said, visit her only when you want to share love with her, but don't see her under any obligation. So to my surprise, so that's the line. He stopped seeing her daily and every other day. He started seeing her about every 2 or 3 weeks. He sent me an email. This is the end of the story. He and the girlfriend bought a condo together. I want you to think about the profoundness of that.
Well, that seems more.
He says, I'm on this side of the line. I'm defining it.
So there's room for somebody else. He's created room for somebody else because mom isn't all encompassing and all enveloping, and now someone else can take some space. He's created some space. That to me sounds more logical than the earlier case that you brought in with the prostitution, which I'm still struggling to wrap my head around. Although I think as I'm hearing you talk more and more, I think I'm getting a better grasp of it. Is his compulsion for prostitution something that's an enmeshed relationship?
Yeah.
Meaning he's enmeshed with whatever it is that he's getting from prostitution, whether it's
No.
so how would you describe that?
So so think about, so if you're growing up in a mesh system, you're intruded on, and your primary defense is to close down and go be protective. It's to neuter yourself. It's to shut it down. You want too much from me, I'm just going to shut down. So I can't be available to the person I'm committed to, but I can be available to somebody I'm not committed to. It's a compensation and a defense against being enmeshed in adult relationships. So no, it's not the enmeshment with the prostitutes, it's compensatory. I can be sexual with a screen image, a fantasy, a pretend person, a sex worker, anything that doesn't require emotional commitment so I don't feel engulfed. So I'll give you another story. Be careful, I'll tell you a lot of stories. This is a short one. So I had two consultations with 2 guys from different workshops with their wives, 3 months apart. They didn't know each other. Both of the women said to me, that was the best sex I ever had with him after the workshop, so I chuckled. The point is that if you reconstruct the internal representation and divorce the contractual demands to be loyal to mommy, I'm not coming every day. I'll come every few weeks. You don't even know who the heck I am. Now I'm available. Now I'm free. Now I can be present. with myself. So there's your connection. This enmeshment has a direct trauma link to sexuality. Make no mistake about it. So so in the 1,000 men and women who have come across from all over the globe, different cultures, we've had about almost 1,000 men and women over the 11 years of the workshop. I'd say probably offhanded 75% have sexual issues. And most of it's compulsivity and the avoidance of being sexual with my partner, because she or he feels intrusive, engulfing, even though it may be nuanced what they want, right? And so oftentimes the enmeshed man or woman will project and displace onto the partner feelings that don't belong there. Or they will provoke them by betraying them, where they now start they start policing them, and now the partner feels like the mother. So the pursuit of prostitutes is, I can be free over here. All I gotta do is pay her. It's transactional. No emotional obligation.
I could keep up my emotional commitment to my mom.
Exactly.
And I don't need to bring anybody else in here or expend any other efforts to be in a relationship.
Exactly.
Excellent.
I want to get to your point, then we can see if there's other questions. But so this business of is the son or daughter clinging to the mother, or is the mother or father clinging to the child? On one hand, well, let me say it this way: the adult parent is fully responsible for regulating that boundary. Let's just make that clear. Yes, temperament is an issue for these kids. So most of the men and women who come into our workshops are sweet souls, very caring, very sensitive, very willing to put themselves aside. So temperamentally, they tend to want to please or be empathic, right? My son was like that, or is like that still. And so my wife and I had to learn to it was our responsibility not to expose him to excessive conflict, because he would absorb it. And we didn't realize it at first, we bickering or fighting or whatever we would be doing. Always my wife's fault, by the way. I want to be clear about that. No, I'm teasing.
Or Alice Miller would call him the gifted child.
Well, fair enough. But so these kids are sensitive. They do want to stay in the comfort of that dependency. Sure. But it still is the parent's job to say, sweetie, I'm glad that you want to marry me, but you're going to find somebody. And it's time to go to school. We'll be here when you get home. You're going to get through this. The parents, so that what the parent, the narcissistic or dependent parent who feels lonely in his or her marriage or relationship says, man, this feels good.
Right.
This kid gives me an empathic love state that nobody's been giving me. Not my parents, not my husband, not my wife. I want to take that in more. So then there begins the excessive and the bridge to locking that kid down. And pretty soon he becomes.
It becomes reciprocal. It becomes a reciprocal pattern. So it's like a win-win for all parties. It feels like a win-win for all parties. And then there's no way it doesn't stop.
But it's fairly common for the kid to develop symptoms pretty quickly. Fearfulness, school phobia, psychosomatic issues.
Why is so? What's the connection of anxieties and phobias to enmeshment?
Well, because we come back to your developmental theory. I come back to Erik Erikson, right? And he was spot on this, particularly in Western cultures. But what do we know about ages? 5 to 8, 5 to 7, and so forth. You begin to learn a degree of agency in the world. You have to have your own sea legs. You have to get out there. right? So by the time you get to adolescence, you've got to test the waters. Do you want to become a doctor or a nurse or a therapist? Most of us don't grow up thinking we're going to be therapists, but some kids do. So you're trying on hats, but if you're too worried about mommy or daddy, you're not involved in your own agency. You're disrupting your identity formation. So you get to adolescence and you're not catching up.
Instead of running around being a kid and having fun, you're too busy worrying about other people's feelings.
Yeah, and you're
So,
not having that period of moratorium that Erickson talked about. 3 to 5 years where you question your parents. Those of you who have kids know about this. They question everything. They rebel, right? They don't learn to say no to mommy. No. I remember when we used to walk my son to school, it was in the neighborhood, and he was at 6 or 7, and we used to give him a hug, and my wife went to hug him. He said, "No, I don't want to hug." And it was that first moment that he made a differential move.
push back. Yeah.
Yeah, and so she cried all the way home, and I was so proud of myself I could support her. But little did I know, by the time the kid reached adolescence, he stiff-armed me. Right? This is my baseball career, Dad, not yours. I'll be doing what I want, not you. So it's just a normal. What enmeshed kids lose is that protest voice, that internal representation of self that says, no, no, no.
Yeah.
You're not crossing this boundary, man. You're not going to exploit me. You're not going to take advantage of me. I have a no. So people who grow up in healthy systems say no when they mean no and yes when they mean yes. If you grow up in an enmeshed system, you say yes when you mean no. And you say no when you'd like to learn how to say yes. Because you lose the agency and the freedom of autonomy. So if you look at Erickson's data, adolescents, young adults who make the most of themselves have a secure base, home, mommy and daddy are there, backing them up, but they have the freedom to leave, he also found out. You needed both for a secure attachment. And in the mesh system, there's too much guilt.
Yep. Yep. Okay,
Somebody,
let's take a question from iPhone, whoever that is.
Hi, thank you. Question about gradations of enmeshment. So you described some extreme examples anecdotally. Would you say that there's like a continuum of enmeshment? Can somebody attempt, getting married and sort of moving out, but still be very dependent on a parent of origin? Like, are there nuances where like the spouse might feel like, why does it feel like my husband's mother is always involved in everything? Like, is there that dynamic where the enmeshment is less extreme but keeps cropping up in like major and minor decisions that this couple is attempting to make because that parental influence seems to be larger than life?
Sure. I mean, I don't know that I can give you exact way to think about that, except the following. So the earlier the enmeshment occurs developmentally, the more downloaded it is and the more habitual it is. If there's physical punishment or threats of punishment or loss, it's even more, you have a more disabled individual. Assuming that this didn't happen, but there's a little too much intrusion by the parents, like what you're suggesting, what you want to work towards is you'll see in critical developmental periods of the kid's life, leaving home, finding his or her own career, not mommy or daddy's career, getting married, having kids, or all those transitional spaces. There was a term for those, I can't remember, but those developmental ritual sacred spaces. The adult child, whether you have extreme enmeshment or low enmeshment, the adult has to reset the boundary. Mom, we got this. We love that you want to be a grandparent to the kids, but we need you to follow our values. So the enmeshed adult must always strengthen the bond during those critical developmental periods. And in enmeshed systems that are not severe, like you're suggesting, the parents they'll zip their lip. They know better. They know that if I let my kid go, they want to return, right? if I hang on, they'll resist me. So when you look at the literature on family systems, the reciprocal irony is that reciprocity, I mean, freedom to separate invites reciprocity of return. So I've learned to keep my mouth shut with my son. I just got off the phone with him tonight. He's in LA dealing with the fires and starting a new career. Wow, 1-2 punch is really tough. But I admire this kid. He's got a lot of moxie to move from Michigan to LA. So he went and, I didn't preach to him about what job I think he should get, even though I was thinking that. So he went and told me about what he was doing. And sure enough, he's stirring up business. And, he turns to me as a consultant if I learn to keep my mouth shut. Right. So in healthier systems, parents are more quick to get that. But the adult, regardless of minor or major enmeshment, has to be the one to come. If they don't have a lot of enmeshment for long term, they're more easy or more quicker to set that boundary. If not, they'll promise the wife that this time I won't let my mother criticize you at the Thanksgiving dinner, but it doesn't happen. He lets her criticize him and they go home and fight. So the more chronic it is, the more difficult it is to hold that space.
I want to just tell everybody, I want to thank Aaron Herzog for bringing Ken Adams on tonight. Aaron tracked him down, found him, and invited him to come on. And Aaron, looks like you have a question. Aaron, go ahead.
Hi, Dr. Adams.
Hi,
Thanks for
Aaron.
coming on. It's more like a supervision question, if I'm allowed to ask. A client, it's 40 years old, just moved out from parents' house,
Mm-hmm.
and he's very enmeshed with his parent. He's
With,
very afraid
with who? With who?
with his father.
Okay.
He's very afraid of his father, but at the same time, he's very enmeshed with him. So he's like moved out from his parents' house. He's ambivalent. Did I do the right thing? I think ambivalent goes together with enmeshment, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So didn't I do? And now he is the thing I realized, which is very interesting. Like he's still, as a small child, pride comes from his parents. Like my parents are A, B, and C. And you tell him that his father he's like getting a light up. He doesn't have like a self. His self is codependent on his father. So my question is, how would you treat it?
You probably are going to he's going to need space. He's going to need time away. So that's a big question that I haven't heard yet, is that, does there need to be a geographic or time or distant or what are the separation boundaries? And it depends on the severity. Back to that last question, which I appreciate the question before you, Aaron. The more severe it is, the more severe the boundary. So in his case, he's going to need time. He's going to have to break that dependency. And you're going to have to reparent this guy. You're going to have to help him get a life, right? And learn to build other relationships outside of his parents. So he's learned to be very dependent.
He's so closed up from everything.
Now
I just asked him to notice his feeling for a few minutes. Just notice your body. And he became depressed because he's so close. He's so close from everything, even from himself. Like he's.
Yeah, so we'd have to talk more, which is probably beyond the scope of our time. But, the other thing that we see, he's 40 years old, so he's got decades of loss. He's missed that critical period that Erickson talked about, intimacy versus despair. And so he didn't get through that stage. He got the wrong side of that deal.
Well,
So
yeah, can I jump in here? I wanted to
yeah,
actually ask you about that. In some communities, some cultures, especially, I know a lot of the Orthodox culture people do this, but the children are expected to get married for the most part by a certain age, and
right.
then while they're looking to get married or trying to get married, they'll be living by their parents. So that can go from 20 to 22 to 24, but then sometimes to 30, 35, 40, and beyond. And I'm curious to know, suppose you had a fairly healthy parent-child relationship. But now, because of circumstances, the child is still living at home with the parents. What specifically is getting arrested there in their development? What are they not developing? And how will this affect themselves to themselves, but specifically and especially to their future attachments?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we have to, so certainly, let me just say that frequency of contact by itself doesn't define enmeshment.
Right.
You can have an involved system, a family system, but you're not made to feel bad if you can't show up for the holiday dinner. You're missed. Can't wait to see you again. I'm glad you're spending time with your sweetie, and we love you dearly, right? So frequency of contact by itself doesn't define it. Now, what I would worry about if there isn't enough exploration of my own journey outside of my family's reasonable expectations of love for me, out of the shadows of the love for my family, if the individual hasn't done some exploring, they may not develop enough. I keep using the word agency. I would think that the ability to be involved romantically would be one of the places you'd see some hindrance, right? I mean, how are you going to have a torrid love affair underneath your parents' roof? It just isn't going to work, man. And you need to follow at some point your own passionate love interest.
Mhm. But I think I'm hearing you say
So you're
that.
going to have some disruption.
So, but technically, you're saying, I think, that one can live under the same roof as their parents, but if they maintain a certain degree of separation, of independence, individuation, then it's not about the closeness of proximity as much as it is about the interpersonal dependence, if I can call that.
Yeah. So, but I'm saying both. I'm saying, yes, what you're saying is true, that frequency of contact or living by yourself doesn't define it. But even under the best of circumstances, if you're still living with your parents at 35, it's disrupting your journey for intimacy.
Okay. Okay.
So I'm saying,
That's not necessarily an enmeshment piece.
so they aren't mutually exclusive. You're wanting to make them sort of mutually exclusive. I don't think so.
Okay.
I haven't, you guys would have to pull up some cases, right? How many, of course, we see a biased group of people, but I don't see many people living under their parents' roof for long periods of time where it doesn't become conflictual. And the parents want separation, right? I mean, that's the other developmental piece that gets disrupted. If you don't get a life outside your kids, you don't get a life. And it's wonderful to have. I mean, I love being a parent. Most of you who are parents probably love being a parent. Most of the time, I love being a parent. Sometimes, don't get me started there. I love my son, and it's a wonderful thing to be a parent. But I have my own life too, and emancipation and differentiation is a next step for parents as well. Where am I going with my chapter? Right? I want you out of the house, man. So why isn't that happening? Why are the parents not saying, I need my space?
Mhm. Right. Well,
I
obviously,
need to
yeah.
have my last chapter. Yes, it includes being your parent and the grandparent, but I want to travel. I want to write a book. I want to have a hobby. I want to play pickleball. I don't know. And I can't be worried about what you need to eat today. Right? So parents have their own developmental journey. Development, again, you follow Eric Erickson, development doesn't stop in adolescence, right? You've met people who are in their later years and they don't reach that stage of reconciliation. They're bitter and they know they've lost their chances and it's over. So one of the things you need in enmeshment recovery is you need individuals to come to terms with the fact that they better put a stake in the ground soon.
Mm.
The sooner the better they put a stake in the ground and they tolerate disappointment in others, guilt in themselves, the quicker they can move. Pearl, you had a question there.
Yes, we're waiting for Pearl.
Yes, thank you. Um, Again, I don't know if this is like an obvious question, but how does culture come into this? Like, there's cultures where men don't take care of their physical needs without a woman. So what if he's a widow or divorcee, like, and he's going back to his elderly mother to take care of those things for him? Is that automatically enmeshment?
Well, I suppose, again, I come back to my story about the guy who came to level 2 and announced that he was seeing his mother in the memory care facility every other day. I think if it's out of love and care, so, I want to love and care about you, Mom, but I'm going to do it on my terms. So that's not enmeshment. If I'm subjugated and I have no choice but to submit myself to your needs, I say that's a problem. You're going to pay a price for that. You're going to eat too much. You're going to sex too much privately. You're going to drink too much. You're going to lose a part of your own soul.
So if someone's coming back to their parent to have their own needs met, and the parent is happy to do it, perhaps because that's the culture, then that is not necessarily problematic.
Not necessarily. That's correct. We'd have to. So again, is it out of subjugation? Is it out of choice? Is it a submissive posture that allows no freedom? What price am I paying for that decision? What am I giving up in my own journey, and what am I getting in return? And is there another formula where I can love my parent and have my own journey? So I don't know. I think of a client who came from India, and part of their culture was to give money to the parents to help support them, right? And so the parents could afford the house on their own, of course, which blew my mind. And the kid is having his first child. He and his wife are having. I called him a kid. He was in his late 20s. He said, "Well, he looks like a kid now." So he's having a child. And the wife's worried because they don't have money. So are we taking care of the parents out of submission or out of choice? So
That's very much cultural.
We have a problem.
Right.
So you're going to do that, you're going to neglect your kid and your wife. So in order to answer your question, we want to ask the wife. You got to get the whole.
She's the barometer. She's the barometer.
She's the barometer. So what he did is he said, I've got X amount of dollars I'm going to give you per year. No more. So he found a way to honor his cultural heritage and hold his space with his partner and his family. So I say it's a problem. If I'm going back and taking care of my parents and I'm leaving my wife and my kid to suffer without money, then I'd say yes, it's pathological. It's enmeshment, whatever word you want to use.
And I want to jump into the next question before we get to Brookie. I have a question here that's really important for us therapists, and that's the question of, that's the question of what I call reenactment. So, we want to help our clients become a bit more disengaged with their enmeshed parent. So we may suggest move away, don't go as often, etc., etc. But are we putting ourselves in a sort of paradox by creating or recreating or reenacting a new form of enmeshment? So the clients come to us and say, dude, I'm really enmeshed with my mom and I got to get out of this because I can't have relationships with other people. What should I do? Tell me. And now he's becoming enmeshed with his shrink. So what do we do about that?
Yeah, that's brilliant. And we were talking about that before we got on. So that's a good counter trend or transference issue to track. So your enmeshed client will want to please you, and they will want to do what you say, and you don't want to mistake that compliance for progress, because you come back, Moshe, and you'd say, "What's it like for you to live in that system? What do you think? Where do you think you need to go with this? How can I be helpful?" You want to stay out of the role assignment to take on the transference, the countertransference that they're giving you.
That they're going to inevitably try to recreate that because that's the
Yes,
only way they know how to live.
that's
That's the
right. They're going
worry.
to want you to tell them how to do it. And sometimes you can be explicit if you have a connection with them. Say, look, I think the last thing I should be doing is telling you what to do because the person you're going to divorce is me. You're going to leave, and they will. They will, if you begin to advise too much, not to say you shouldn't intervene. What's it like for, are you willing to maybe put this conversation on the table and look at it differently? How can I help you love your parents but give you a little space to have your own perception? Is there a role I can play? You want to keep giving them the freedom to involve you and the
Kind of
permission to involve you because you're reparenting. You're giving them what they couldn't get from their parent, which was the respect that you will honor their separateness with you, and you will ask them respectfully how they can be of assistance to you.
And I imagine you have to be mindful in this process. You can hurt a patient to the degree that they'll leave by rejecting them and not being explicit with them. And I think there's a balance where you have to share the risk of reenacting this dynamic with them so that they understand that you're not doing this as a form of rejecting them and pushing them away, but rather as a way of helping them to sit with their discomfort of having to be somewhat autonomous.
Yeah, so on my website, so on overcoming enmeshment, you guys can. There's lots of free videos you can click it on in your session, and the title of the homepage is "How to Love Your Parents," or how's it go? How to be separate and still love your parents. How to be something like that, because both are possible. They're not mutually exclusive, and that's right. You want to deliver that. I know we're going to run. I'm going to run out of time. And you guys are so, Rushi.
Well, we have some flexibility. So
I'm afraid I'm going to hit the wall. So
go ahead, Bruchi.
Go ahead.
It's also a bit of a supervision question, since I'm asking the question based on a case that I'm involved in. What if a client denies the enmeshment?
Well, I guess we'd have to examine what was the intervention, what was your approach, what labels did you lose? I wouldn't be quick to use the word enmeshment. What's it like for you to leave your family home and feel so angry you're screaming in the car? What's that about? And they'll start talking about feeling guilty. And I don't want to listen to my mother. Wow. So you want to keep empathizing with them before, as much as possible, lead the horse to water, and so before you deliver a diagnosis or a label, you can do the reframing they taught us in family therapy. It sounds like you're very protective of your mother. I think that's great. No wonder, the word enmeshment must feel judgmental. Maybe we can find a different word, because I think you should stay protective of your mother. So what they taught us in family therapy was to invite the symptom. I think it's great that you're being protective. Well, I don't want to be that protective. So then you'll get a little pushback. So I think we'd have to explore a little more your intervention, how you got there. And although some people are in flat out denial, like they are with addictions. Mm-hmm. And the truth of the matter is that there's going to be problems, and the person who will suffer will be the spouse.
And is there a way to understand or reconcile what I've seen, which is children who often hate their parents or are enraged with their parents, yet still keep going back? They seem to be enmeshed while at the same time enraged.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever seen that?
Oh, yeah. Oh, sure. Love gets replaced by hate, and the family system becomes connected through anger, hate, and so all families operate through affective connections, right? And so in the absence of learning how to love, we can at least be disgusted and angry with each other. It's sadly a form of connecting that is really quite destructive. You've seen it in some family systems and couples. Well, I'm glad you had me on here. You guys say interesting. I've heard about your podcast here, and happy to.
But this was wonderful. I mean, this was a real treat and sort of a tease. So I
Well,
would say,
is it okay if I mention my training that I do one day?
that's what I was about to ask you. Can you share
So,
with us your resources and where you're at and how
yeah,
people
yeah. So, Overcoming Enmeshment is the name of the website. Lots of stuff on there, free stuff, with access to the Overcoming Enmeshment, one word, overcomingenmeshment.com. Once a year, I do a best practices workshop for therapists, September. So September 2025, I'll do a best practice workshop. You'll find it on the website. I think we have the current date on there. It's September something 2025. And basically for 8 hours, it's not a certification, it's the do's and the don'ts. So should you do family therapy, bring in your mother to ease her through the deal that you're going to emancipate? The short answer is no.
really.
Why? Because it feels like marital therapy.
Mm.
And if you have an addiction, you'll relapse after you get out of the session. So I do those kind of best practice.
I feel like it's almost it's if you bring the mother in, you're almost still staying enmeshed. Like you're sort
Exactly.
of justifying to her what you're going to do and why you're going to do it, and you're opening yourself up for manipulation.
Exactly. Emancipation is a statement. You don't need permission. You'd like their blessing. You deserve their blessing, but it's not required. So I go through a bunch of practice points, and it's not as, and you get your name on my website as somebody who's gone through the workshop, so you can have a referral.
Yeah.
I can't tell you, I get emails all day long from spouses and partners and enmeshed individuals all over the globe. It's amazing to me. I mean,
Yeah.
hit some button here. I can't believe it sometimes. So overcoming enmeshment, the practice. For the Jewish clients, I am a consultant over at jewishfreshstart.com. They're working on putting together an enmeshment workshop. In the meantime, they treat trauma, and I show up with them once a month and talk about enmeshment and other things. So they're doing some good work there. They're in Michigan, actually.
So I just want to invite everybody. I know Ken has to go, but I want to invite everyone, whoever wants to stay on and continue this conversation, just some thoughts back and forth. And thank you again for joining us tonight and taking time out of your late schedule. And
Well, thanks for having me.
we hope we could continue the conversation and the discussion.
Yeah, have me another time. I'll come back on. Thank you,
Good.
guys.
Thanks for offering. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye-bye
night.
now. Good night.
Good night.
See you guys.
Okay, guys, mic's open, audio's on. Thoughts, process.
Yes, I was just gonna say,
Who's talking?
regarding Brachi's question, I found that a lot of this stuff is subconscious. People are not aware of this, and you can't tell them directly. They will deny it. They will fight you. No, you're wrong. There's nothing like that going on. You have to kind of lead them slowly. You can't jump ahead of the game.
Right, you have to really explore the relationship and what the relationship means to her, how much it means to her, how intense it means to her, what it's like for her to live without her mother's opinion or approval, and that kind of thing. And then once that's all set up and developed, then you can sort of say, well, it makes it easy for us to understand. We could understand why it might be so hard for you to disappoint her, or et cetera, et cetera. Whether or not you choose to ever use the word enmeshment, I think he was, alluding to the idea that might just come up on its own. She may bring that up, but you want to be careful not to stick her with a dagger, I think is what he was saying. Yeah, and Rena, thank you.
Thank you, Rena.
Yeah,
I'm going to add on to this. It's not so much only the denial part. There's so much justification, like why her parents need her, and why there's no way that she can
But
leave.
her case is different, and
Right.
that's important.
Exactly, and it's keeping
That's
her
part of the
stuck in
enmeshment,
so
though.
many ways.
That's part of the enmeshment. That's
And
part
it's
of, yeah.
also part of how the enmeshment evolved, because mom, let's just call it mom, right, may have been very weak or vulnerable or unsupported by a spouse or by other supports. And now she learned to lean on daughter. And of course, it's true that she needs daughter. That doesn't mean that she wouldn't be able to manage without daughter and figure it out. And it also doesn't mean that daughter needs to be there and sacrifice everybody else in her ecosystem.
Can I add that when you're talking about the denial part, I have a client who she's in a she's in a state when by the time she came to me, she was already angry. She realized about how enmeshed she was with her mother, and she's very angry at her mother. And part of what she feels is this deep pain of none of the love my mother ever gave me was legitimate. It was all selfish. And I think that that realization is very painful for anyone to come to. Not that it's true for every enmeshed
Mm-hmm.
relationship, but
Mm-hmm.
to have to deal with that reality is very scary. To
Yeah,
have to think
it's mostly true.
not real love, like whatever that means.
Right, and
I,
I also think it's going back to what Aaron said. They have to start from A. They become so little and helpless and powerless, and they have to literally start from A.
right.
Yeah.
And I want to hit on Rifki's question. How would you answer a client's question about how this transgresses honoring their parents? Well, I don't think it's our role to figure that out for them. I think that it's our role for us to help them understand what it is that's going on in the dynamic. And then they have to recognize how this is hurting them. And then they have to decide based on however they make their decisions as to how much separation they consider being a transgression of honor of thy parents, right? Versus how much they believe is healthy. And if they feel that they are not clear and they need Torah guidance, then they should go do that. But our role as a therapist is not to answer that question, it's to help them figure out what's the cause of their suffering. And once they identify that, to determine what it is that they're going to do about it. And we can maybe help, at most, help them recognize that separation if that's not self-evident, but help them to recognize that separation from the enmeshment will be helpful for them and their family. And then they have to figure out how to contend with those other problems. Greg, I know you're raising your hand, but this is a free, open talk, so there's no hand raising here.
Okay, no more hands. Um, Thanks, Moshe. Good to see you.
Likewise.
I really enjoyed his visit, what he had to offer. I wanted to, I don't know if this is additive or if it's self-evident, but the question that you asked, as I understood it, regarding the interesting phenomenon of a child who seems to hate or feel enraged with the parents and yet continues, an adult child, I imagine, who still continues to come around and connect. And what I was taught in grad school and is true to my personal experience and and working with folks is the that wherever there's anger or any part of anger, the scale of anger, rage, fury, underneath the anger invariably is hurt, and underneath the hurt invariably is the loving. That there's a direct commensurate relationship between the degree of anger or rage, the degree of the hurt, and also the degree of the like endless, infinite, unbearable ocean of compassion. And the way I experience it is like Hashem imbues each of us with an impulse or a wiring to connect heart to heart in a loving way. And so it's like my sense of it is I got to get through this. I got to get
So
through this because
I
there's
think it resonates. In the case of the particular client that I'm thinking about, but though maybe more than one. But in this particular one, I think that what he's really looking for is love from his, in this case, it's his father. He's really looking for that, and the frustration that he can't get it. He keeps running back to try to find it and hope to find it, and then the letdown and the frustration is just enraging. You know.
Yeah.
Also, as long as I keep fighting, I remain daddy's little boy.
Mm.
I don't have to grow up.
And then also, it would seem to me, I was talking to my wife about this yesterday as I was having a revelation regarding a childhood challenge that I experienced and was experiencing a measure of tenderness and appreciating the gift of disillusionment that any kind of healing, transformative, therapeutic experience characteristically includes some accompanying disillusionment that's actually a gift because one has to let go of the previous notion of how things are. So as long as one remains enmeshed in that way and being daddy's good boy, whatever the dynamic might be, then it also provides sanctuary from dealing with the grief of it not being an empowering, independence, agency, supportive relationship.
What was interesting here is that he defined it very clearly that the relationship is that the child is the parent's boyfriend or girlfriend. So a lot of them, what I thought till
He
now,
said lover. I think he said lover, right?
uh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
so, but till, and in my mind, like, of course, I'm going through my whole roster of clients. Okay, who fits? Who does it fit to? Because so the measurement in terms of intrusiveness and dysfunctionality, I don't know if it always fits under this definition, because sometimes a relationship, it's like this. Okay, that's one client. He is mom's confidant. Mom has a very bad marriage. Mom is very borderline. He's there to soothe her feelings. I mean, yes, he is okay. But other ones are just mom's dysfunctional, kid is, I don't know, taking care of mom in a way, or mom is busy taking care of kid in an intrusive way. It's not necessarily exactly this.
But I think I think that the idea is we can look at it from a different angle that highlights the idea, which is if mom would have an appropriate other, then she wouldn't need child. So if
Okay.
mom would have dad, or would have, if she's not married, would have a girlfriends, or others. I was going to say parents, but that gets into the question of her own enmeshment, right? Then she should be able to function and deal with life without child or son being her support and holding her hand. The parent child role should be that the child is the child in the parental relationship, not an equal, or an equal means a lover. It means that you're getting your needs met. It might not necessarily be always emotional needs, but probably gonna infringe on emotional needs too. Oh, let me call my son, let me call my daughter, let me, right, to get all these needs met. And that's really where it gets messy.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know if everything that looks like it is exactly it, is what I'm saying.
That's the continuum and spectrum question, probably.
That could be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this fits into the conversation we've been having about estrangement from parents. Like, at what point when working through this and on this, in this process, of course, the
Great
parent's going to
point.
say,
Great point.
this
Great point.
therapist, as soon as what do you mean she's not catering to my every whim? Like, when I called her and I told her and I
And
asked
they
her to
quote
do
cry
this.
foul. They cry foul that the
Yeah.
therapists are alienating my children from me, and the therapists will go to hell.
Yeah. So it's hard to, we know where we're going with it and we hope to get there, and we hope to have partners on both sides and the patients. I keep asking for, can you give it time? But it's hard to be in the middle.
We also see how relieved our clients
Right.
become
Right.
in this process, right? And we're so proud of them, and they're so happy and confused and ambivalent, but also happy, right?
Mhm.
And then their parents are the ones coming and saying we're bad and they're bad, and we're robbing their kids from them because they don't
Yeah.
want to stay enmeshed. And
But
you
I've
know
seen
what?
the other side of it when you try too hard to hold it on the other end, then the client is also
Right.
saying like, you're too worried about, like what I thought you're going to help me here,
Right. Why are you keeping my mother so well? But and Esty, I think that's the other point is, and I don't know how this is possible, but the thought is that what if we could also help the parent to understand and to embrace a degree of separation, lest their child need to cut off completely from them and be able to stay in a healthier balance so that they could be separated and together versus have to completely cut off. And if the parent could really understand that and embrace that. And again, I think it's the parents who, usually the ones who cry the loudest are the ones who are the biggest problem. And they won't agree to embrace a healthy balance of separation and togetherness.
Yeah, that's the trickiest part. Like I said, that if we can be more creative about how to do that, I would love ideas.
Yoel,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, along those lines, just before Ken got off, he gave an example of something he would teach during his yearly thing, and you commented on it, but I didn't get it clear about sometime when it would not be appropriate to bring the mother into family therapy. Can you just can you clarify what that was? Because I think that relates to what you were just talking about.
Yes, I was thinking, yes. He was talking about not bringing the mother into family therapy. He said something to the effect of it becoming marital therapy. I'm not sure exactly what he meant by that. What I thought he meant was something to the effect of that. Then it's going to sound like you're trying to get them back together. You're trying to resolve. And what we're really trying to do is make, so to say, a fight. Okay, what we're trying to do is trying to create a distance to do the opposite of what we would do in marital therapy. There, we want the couple to communicate, to be, so to say, dependent on each other in a healthy way, but dependent, enmeshed, but in a healthy way. Over here, we're trying to separate that symbiosis that's disabling the child. And so, as soon as the mother enters the therapy room with the child, we're subjecting them to the risk that there's a togetherness. They're by default together now, right? What we want is the child to be able to step away and move away. Just on a practical level, you're subjecting the child to the mother's manipulation. She could start making conditions or provisions in how this is going to work, right? Just in a very pragmatic way, you're already putting it at risk. But even in a symbolic way, right? Like he was talking about structural family therapy and how Mnuchin would separate and switch the chairs around symbolically, right? To show that, to put the mother together with the father instead of the mother together with the child and the child separate, right? He would do these symbolic things. Even symbolically, if you bring them into the room together, by virtue of the fact that they're in the room together, you're symbolically holding them together instead of separating them. That's what I was saying.
Yeah. So one of the first things that I remember from my training in systemic family therapy is how we were taught that non-communication is a form of communication, and specifically relating to Bowen and cutoff. But you cannot separate a child from their parent. There is a relationship. There's an inherent relationship that is there, right? That's why we use that as a muscle every Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, because we can't be cut off from Hashem. So I'm just pushing back a little bit to say I don't want to bring the mother into the room because we're trying to accomplish some kind of